Live.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 51st week of the Free Assange Online Vigil. My name is Andrew Smith, and I'm joined by my co host, Steve Poikinen. Today, our guest is Elizabeth Lee Voss, back with us again. But before we get into talking with her, it is day 3,486 of the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange. It is 300 or 439 days since the WikiLeaks publisher was trafficked out of the Ecuadorian embassy following a $4.2 billion international monetary loan to the nation of Ecuador. It is 76 days until the second phase of Julian Assange's extraordinary rendition hearing takes place in London. It is 1,116 days of incarceration for Reality Winner. But in some good news, it is day 102 of freedom for Chelsea Manning. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us, and I will be posting some links here into the chat with our GoFundMe for DC because we are trying to fundraise to get out there. We've raised a little under $1,600 so far on our GoFundMe, but all the super chats you guys send in for when they'll make it to us will also go towards that, but we do prefer GoFundMe contributions directly. And if you aren't able to contribute because the world's pretty much gone insane in the last couple months, please feel free just to share the link around because that makes a big difference as well. But with that, how are you tonight, Steve?
Trying to stifle a cough. I'm beat, homie. It has been hot, and I think I mentioned this before, but I'm a carpenter by trade, and I've been on a never-ending deck project, which like I'll probably be at this property right up until the day we get on a plane to go to DC. And for the last like 3 work days straight, I've done basically nothing but drill holes into concrete. I had broken capillaries all over my shoulder and chest from leaning into this thing. It looked like a really bad hipster tattoo. Like somebody just took some like dark red and scribbled on me. It was interesting. But I am very happy to be here, and I'm stoked that Elizabeth is joining us. It was kind of a last minute thing, so I really appreciate that, dude. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you for asking. It's been a hectic few weeks for me too. You know, I think everybody can empathize with that at this point. So, but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're all are still doing these vigils. And that was a great summary at the beginning, I might add. I think that's a great way of starting off each show.
It's been mind-blowing to just watch the count grow over the last 1 week shy of a year. And yeah, every time we go live, it gets read out. Fortunately we've been able to include the high note there at the end with Chelsea Manning being released and enjoying now over 100 days of freedom for the first time in quite a while for her. Yeah, I mean, and we know she's taking it pretty easy and not trying to put herself out there too much. And you know what, man, she has fucking earned that.
Absolutely. No question.
So how at liberty are you to talk about what you're working on? Can you tease people at all, or is this like total radio silence?
Well, basically, I mean, last time we spoke, I was working on the Epstein article, so that's what I was referencing. Then I'm totally happy to talk about that. You know, that was a project for quite a while. A number of weeks I was working on that, and yeah, I have some follow-up stuff on that in the works. And I mean, you know, basically all you have to say is, you know, you're in contact with Whitney, and hopefully things will come from there, sort of thing. So she's, you know, an amazing journalist and is absolutely an encyclopedia on the issue. So.
Yeah, it's nuts. Every time that she's on Slow News Day, she breaks brains, and it's one of those things where like I do a fair amount of prep before every interview that I have, but with Whitney, I've got like 4 pages of notes, and it still doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what she's able to just
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, no, yeah, you have to just get enough time in there to allow her to just unfold the information she has. It's incredible. But yeah, so that's I mean, really what I've been working on. And so I think it's just like it's important that amongst the COVID and Black Lives Matter issues as they unfold, it's so easy for the Assange situation and subjects like Epstein to fall through the cracks. And so I think it's really important that you all are still doing these vigils, and that people like Whitney Webb and Consortium News are still pursuing the Epstein issue and stuff like that. That's the real importance of independent journalism, is chasing what the media narrative is not chasing. So
I agree with that 100%. Oh man, I had something that was
So
just
last week,
right here.
we talked about a article that got published in Consortium News, which was an open letter signed by 47 different political world leaders from across the world. And this was everyone from Ron Paul to Giannis to Mike Gravel to so many people in Parliament that I have no idea who they are. And I love that, because it shows the cross ideological situation that we're in, that you can't take this ism and that ism and say, okay, this is where we're going. These are the problems. How do we fix them in this moment in time? So what we did for this week's call to action is I went and got a couple of those people's contact information from that list of 47. And I'll put the link in the chat, but I'm asking that everyone take some time to say thank you for them, or to them, for this. Because supporting Julian Assange, while it should be a basic thing, like, yes, I support him, in the realm of global geopolitics, it's essentially a death sentence for somebody to come out in favor of Julian Assange. We've seen what they've done to Chris Williamson over in the UK. We've seen what happens to U.S. politicians like Tulsi Gabbard, that they get railroaded outside of the campaign, and all of these other things. So for these people in positions of authority to speak up for him does go a really long way, and is at great personal risk to them as well. So if you could, please take the time, everybody, to send them some thank you emails and thank you phone calls. I put the contact to their websites on there as well. But yeah, it's just a super, super important thing that these people, as they come forward in support of Julian, are met with people that say, thank you for doing this. What more can we do?
yeah, I'll second that. Please do that.
And it's all like, it's one of those things where I'm pretty sure there aren't people tripping over themselves to thank these people for speaking up about that. So it'll have significance. Like it won't just be, I'm sucking up to a politician because I want a bill passed. It's, you did the right thing without being prompted. That's rare. You deserve credit for that. You had mentioned the COVID and Black Lives Matter. We were talking with Elizabeth Mueller just a couple of days ago, not on the vigil, just because we hang out and talk. And she had brought up that there's a way to relate what is going on with Julian Assange and relate what is going on to journalists in general. And we have an article about that we'll pull up here in a minute. To the way that activists within Black Lives Matter get targeted, the way that fusion centers operate, and I want to know what you think about that, because you deal with an entirely different class of journalists than we usually do. Because Consortium News is freaking awesome, and it's where some incredible people go to publish their stuff. Is that an avenue, in your opinion, that you think is worth pursuing, on both in terms of putting out content about it, but also as part of our general activism?
Well, I think in general and broad terms, I think the idea that activists are targeted across the board, not really dependent on the political leanings of the group, but pretty much any activist community is going to be targeted by the federal government and infiltrated to whatever degree. I would argue fusion centers are involved with that. As far as the specifics, should XY line of inquiry be followed? I think that if it's something that you find worthy of targeting as far as journalism, you should go out and do that. I would encourage Liz to write an article, to start up a blog and follow it. Find the information, find the evidence that she finds, and publish it. That's what I mean. I think one of the things that people tend to do is they tend to say, well, this is my favorite outlet, or this is my favorite journalist. Why aren't they covering my favorite issue or whatever? And it's like, we need more people that have those issues to cover it themselves, because otherwise, I mean, there are just not enough independent journalists and outlets out there to cover all of them. But yeah, I think it is a significant issue, and I think it's one worth talking about.
You're right, though. I mean, we've talked about this a number of times, that the trap is, let's only report on the political horse race, or let's only cover what we know is clickbaity and is going to get eyes on the channel. And it leaves this massive space to where people should be able to just swoop in and be like, bam, I wrote this, I got this, we were going to talk about this tonight. And the problem is that when you've trained your audience to only respond to coverage based on the horse race, they tune the fuck out when you're talking about anything else. And it's one of the more frustrating aspects of independent media in general, is just, it's I guess it's always kind of been, but over the last year and a half, it has really just become another outlet for bias or confirmation of biases.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think that that's one of the things that the really good independent media and independent journalists do, is they don't follow the horse race so much as they look at the issues that corporate media leave out, like omitting entirely or misrepresenting. And like when, so for example, whole 2016 election or whatever, most people are going, Trump is bad, Hillary should have won, all of this stuff, and they weren't looking at how Russiagate was a propaganda narrative and deconstructing it. So it's like, you can, but my point of bringing that up is that you can sort of look at the horse race in a deconstructive way rather than feeding into that blue versus red issue. So yeah, so it's complex, but I think, Liz should definitely, I would encourage Liz, I would encourage everybody who has an issue that they care about like that they don't think is getting the coverage that it needs, to start doing it themselves if they have the ability to do that.
Well, and on Slow News Day, you and I have gone through pieces that you've written that are related to how, like, the DNC operates. You wrote a fantastic article called "It's the DNC Stupid," and there's the bulk of that article is still relevant right now, even though there's no Bernie Sanders, even though there's no Tulsi Gabbard. What's in the article stands on its own without a particular, quote unquote progressive candidate being in there. And that's that's the sign that it is a good piece of journalism. But you're right. You can frame something about the horse race look at it in terms of what's going on while you're being distracted by the horse race. And my hope is, as election season kind of winds down, not only will those content creators start to look at different issues, but they'll be able to, I guess, retrain their audiences to be able to look at something outside of, oh my God, did you see what AOC said on Twitter today?
Right. Yeah. And I think it is so easy when people, and we've talked about this before, but I think it's really easy if your goal is financial. So if your goal is to get the most viewers as quickly as possible, the easy route to that is to buy into red versus blue, or it's to buy into a specific type of narrative, or just a specific subject area that you exclusively follow so that you can get that audience as quickly as possible. And again, that's why truly independent journalism is so rare. And the people that do the best work are often not getting any money at all. And they're the people that are doing the work because they want to, because they think it's a service to the public, because it is. And there are not enough of those people. Most people cannot afford the time financially, especially now, to do that. So anyone who can, it's a gift. So.
Yeah, and on that, I want to give a shout out to Last American Vagabond, because that outlet goes above and beyond to not delve into the bullshit in the horse race, and what Derek Rose has been doing covering the fluoride trials, and what Whitney's been doing for the last couple of months out of there. Just really, really, really good work. And
Completely
consortium.
agree. No, I completely agree about the Last American Vagabond. They're great.
And we do. I mean, we almost weekly here on the Vigil have something out of consortium news that we cover, because it. I mean, it's a probably the standard for independent journalism, and so every time we get somebody from CNN on, we're really, really happy. So again, thank you. Josh, if you could, because I want to get Liz's take on this, if you could please pull up the article about over 400 attacks on press freedom.
It's up.
Alrighty. I'm just gonna, let's see. Kind of give you an overview real quick. But there have been over 400 cases of press freedom violations in the United States since late May, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And they're interviewing Courtney Radish, or Radch. She says, we've been working closely with the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, which is doing all of the investigations and documentation. The Committee to Protect Journalists is a founding partner of the tracker, and we've been investigating more than 400 incidents since the outbreak of protest over racial injustice and police brutality. They include arrest by police, assaults, targeting of protesters with projectiles, stealing of equipment, and a range of different attacks, which they're documenting and making available on the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker website. So this is an outlet that has really not done a damn thing in terms of Julian Assange. But I do think that it's important that how the press has been treated since Memorial Day is covered and talked about.
I agree. And I think that it's interesting that we have mainstream journalists also referencing this. Obviously, CNN employees were some of the journalists that were attacked by police or at least arrested by police. I think that it's interesting that when it's a CNN journalist, everyone in the mainstream media down cares. When it's Assange, there's just either complete smear jobs or it's just silence. And I think that it is correct to view it as within the context of Assange's extradition hearings and in the context of Assange's potential, prosecution in the United States. I think that we've all, everybody who's done any sort of activism around the Assange issue and the WikiLeaks issue has always said, first it's Assange, then it's everyone else. And we've seen that. And now I think we are seeing that, because I think if the government hadn't been so easily able to get away with prosecuting Assange to this point, I don't know that it would feel as comfortable arresting and only attacking journalists in the street. I do think those are related.
No, I agree. Andrew, you looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I don't even think it's related on a personal level, like with the officers thinking it's okay. I think it's a larger institutional system where it's almost like the rules of engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan, where it is just part of your job as a police officer in a protest situation to assault journalists, to go there and take the cameras away from people, because you don't want eyes on what you're going to do to the next round of people once the cameras are off. So I think that it's part of literally just the playbook of the tyranny infrastructure that we have within the United States to be able to operate in that manner.
Completely agree. And I think one way you can look at it as well is not only the idea of it being an institutional culture, not just the guys on the ground thinking, oh yes, I'm going to attack this journalist or arrest them because Assange is also in prison. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that you can look at this as a microcosm of the attack against Assange and WikiLeaks, because just like the guys on the ground don't want the journalists to be able to document stuff they're going to do to protesters, the powers that be in a larger way don't want Assange and WikiLeaks to document what the powers that be are doing to the world. So it's the same crux of an issue on a larger and smaller scale, for sure.
And I hope that we can really find a way to relate the two. So that way activist communities in general understand that what's happening to Assange is also happening to them in the streets. And I just don't know how to most effectively make that bridge with that thought idea of, if it can happen to him and it is happening to us, we need to stop it.
I would say you could relate it by saying that anyone who tries to document abuses of power, whether it's on the street or in a corporation or in a government, are going to be attacked by the powers that they're trying to expose. And so you see that with Assange, and you see it with journalists on this. I think that's the simplest way to try to describe it for people. And I think that it does make sense if you have an open mind and you haven't already been propagandized against Assange. If you're not convinced already of the smear narratives against him, I think that that would make sense to the average person.
That's why we have you on. That was well crystallized, and it's true. And there's another component to that as well, and that's for at least 15 years, U.S. police departments have been getting training by the IDF, and one of the just sort of classic moves from the Israeli Defense Forces is to take out journalists, and then also to take out women and children. We saw in Seattle, when it got hectic for the first night, there was like a 10-year-old kid that got a can of mace emptied into her face. Now, I'm not trying to say that we're it. If the police had never had the IDF training, that wouldn't have happened. But the way that it's normalized, and the way that people are just sort of trained or conditioned to view anyone who isn't wearing the same outfit that they are as the enemy, that mindset is what allows for horrific shit like this to happen.
Well, we've had the funding of television shows by the government, shows like Cops and things like that, that set a public standard for the way that police interact with society. And that funding mechanism was built by Nixon right when the war on drugs kicked off, as a way to propagandize society to accept the level of violence that the war on drugs takes to enforce. So we even see it going as deep as literal funding to grow generations of violent police officers.
I want to real quick just read off my favorite quote from John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's special counsel and assistant for domestic affairs. And Ehrlichman said, do you understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to either be against the war or against blacks. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. And that blueprint that Ehrlichman and Nixon put into play has just exploded over the last 25 years. And one of the people most responsible for that is the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. Chris Hedges said just the other week that Biden is worse than Trump. Trump inherited this system. Biden was one of its architects. And that's my new favorite Chris Hedges quote.
Absolutely. I think you really can't outdo Chris Hedges in synthesizing that information, and he was spot on, completely spot on. And that's exactly why I would never vote for Biden. I don't, almost no matter who he was against, I would never vote for him, because it's, just as Chris Hedges said, he was one of the architects of everything wrong with America today. Almost everything, I should say, at least in the last few decades. Everything that's been constructed and enforced in the last few decades in recent memory has had Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton all over it, in addition to the Republicans. So, and there was an analysis somewhere recently that basically talked about the fact that it was under the Clintons that essentially that's when the Democrats sort of shifted into diet Republicans, and they shifted to be against all of the people that they claim to represent. And I think that's really true, and I think it's accurate. And so I think that you really couldn't do any worse than Joe Biden, unless maybe you got Hillary Clinton. Because, I mean, it's hard to know which one's worse, in the sense that at least Hillary Clinton doesn't seem to have dementia, but they're both equally bad. It's like, So,
right? Do you want a cognizant psychopath, or do you want one that like will just walk off screen in the middle of a live?
Where it depends on yeah. I mean, it's just at that point. But and which one's going to lose worse to the WWE heel? It's just
well, there is another wrestler stepping up, Jesse Ventura.
Yeah.
Is that for sure?
And I don't know, but if you remember right, following 2016, there was a Draft the Rock campaign for the Democratic Party. So I'm really hoping that it'll be like Jesse Ventura versus The Rock versus Donald Trump. Like, I just think that pro wrestling matchup would be fucking.
Hey, it's more honest.
Yeah.
I mean, because everybody knows wrestling is fake. Sorry if that's a spoiler for anybody. But I mean, even so, if we look at politics, and we here know that it's fake too, in the same way. So it's more accurate to have wrestlers as politicians. I mean, I don't know. It's beyond words at some point. But yeah,
I just can't wait for Governor Hulk Hogan. That'll be my favorite.
He couldn't do any worse than like Rick Scott has done in Florida. He really couldn't. In terms of the Democrats being Republican-like, and I'm sure that like you guys know this, but I'm not sure if everybody in the chat does. In 1986, something called the Democratic Leadership Council was formed, and it was formed because the Democrats had just gotten the crap kicked out of them in 2 presidential elections in a row. There was a wholesale rejection of the party in general, but what they stood for as well. Unions were crumbling on purpose. And so Bill Clinton and the Koch brothers and a number of other just titans of industry got together and said, never again are we going to lose, because we're seen as the people who are against corporations. So we're going to embrace them. And even Clinton himself was sort of a dark horse in that 92 race that was supposed to be handed to Governor Moonbeam, Jerry Brown. And there was a just vicious smear campaign put out by the Clinton machine. And, they had cohorts in the Bush family, with which they're related. And Jerry Brown was just, he was dog walked all over TV all day, every day. And the result of that was him losing his home state in a primary to Bill Clinton, which Hillary Clinton was quick to bring up. When she was down to Obama, she was like, well, my husband, he won California late in the game, so it's possible that I could. And we should remember what happened to Bobby Kennedy too.
I remember that.
It got her on fucking Keith Olbermann's worst person in the world bit. Do you remember that bit?
Yep.
He did one on Hillary Clinton, and it was like the last negative thing he was ever allowed to say about Hillary Clinton. And
is it even still on the internet somewhere? I mean, if they scrubbed it completely from social media, I would imagine.
I'm gonna look right now, because I'll take a copyright claim on my channel to play that.
So, we were talking a little bit earlier about Nixon's influence over the war on drugs and police culture. But to tie him back into this conversation too, just in a way, a lot of the campaign finance, all actually of the campaign finance issues that we have now harken back to Nixon. Because I want to say it was like 1907 and 1916, there was legislation passed that blocked electrical companies, gas companies, and corporations from contributing in any way, shape, or form to political campaigns, like a total and utter ban on political campaigns at the start of the original progressive era back in the day, which wasn't a great era, but just to frame it in history. Nixon, I believe it was in 1974, passed what was called light money in politics and created the FEC. And essentially what it did is it shifted how political campaigns were allowed to be financed, and it injected what was called soft political money, which didn't allow corporations and utility companies to directly pay political candidates, but they could purchase what's called in-kind donations, which is essentially we'll buy your T-shirts and your signs, and we'll get your advertisements put up, but we can't give you money. We can just buy you things. So that's how the influence started, and then you see it escalate to where, like we had talked about in the mid 80s, to where they started breaking the trade unions because the corporations had reached this high level of influence. So there's a lot, even just from this show, that ties back into the Nixon administration and what they did in the years leading up to impeachment in his second term that are still felt today in our society.
Wow, that's good to know. And, I think that to bring it back to Assange for a moment, I'd like to ask